There we go. So, federations, Eduroam, Edugain, identity stuff. Any questions or topics you'd like to discuss in that space? It's a fairly broad space. It impacts a lot of stuff, HPC, right through to students getting cheap pizzas. Can be affected by a good identity federation. And the longer you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Okay,
and also
can I
open
ask
to
a
the
question?
floor, guys, online. So if you guys have any questions, happy to start a discussion around those questions.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. I'm Nafio from BDREN. From online, I'm asking you a question. I mean, can you
So
hear
who have
me?
we got in the room? We've got Japan. Yep, from Japan. Yes. And
Hello.
Japan as well. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Thailand. Oh, so you're doing the next APAN. Good. And Australia / Hong Kong / wherever you're from. In the back corner there. So we've been trying to get Chihu to add a service to our federation for a long time now. How's that going, my friend? Yep. So Chihu's part of APNIC, and they have a training facility or training service that they make available to students across the Asia Pacific region. And we've been trying for a long simpler. But the issue is that it's also tied in with other services that are more restrictive within your organisation, and to try and split them out is being a challenge for you guys. Yeah. But that's part of the joy of being doing Identity Federation stuff. Yeah, keeps me employed anyway. Oh, okay. I have to log into the Zoom thing to see that, I suppose. Let me just Hoover. The hard way. Them links, so we're after the library, channels of volumes. Got that. Okay, so
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask a question to Terry, if you don't mind.
cool.
Okay, I was thinking about checking on some documents if I can get any. I was trying to. I mean, the universities are asking about their own in-house developed softwares, like in Laravel or PHP other frameworks, maybe in some Python frameworks. They have developed some like their library applications and other applications. So when we're talking about their single sign-on or the federated login, they were asking about how they can incorporate it on their own softwares. So they were asking about if there is any documentation on that and easy way of documentation. There are some documentations online, but they weren't able to find their way out into that. So is there any simplistic way that any of our federation members have implemented or made any documentation for some kind of applications, at least some types, maybe for some Laravel or WordPress or some other types of applications for single sign-on? Is it available? And also mainly for Moodle, like LMS service they have used. So they're asking about if there is any easy documentation or easy way of implementing it in Moodle or something like this. Is it available?
So I know for Moodle there is a raft of documentation on the Moodle site about how to connect Moodle up to a shibboleth service provider, which can then be added to the federation. We have a number of Moodle servers in Australia that are connected to our federation. So that one's fairly easy. I should take some notes and see if I can find some specific stuff for you. SSO for Moodle. And I think Farhan is actually from Malaysia, their federation. They've actually done some work with Moodle to make it a federated service. So it's not that difficult. For other services, it really depends on what technology stack has been used. You mentioned some with their PHP.
Yes, some PHP framework like a Laravel framework, or maybe from Python Django framework or something like this.
Yep. So one of the things that you could have a look at is Simple SAML PHP. It's both an identity provider and a service provider, but it's very well integrated into PHP. So that might be an option for your guys to add that or use that particular service and investigate how to integrate that with their existing code. If it's all built on-prem, so it's all in-house developed, it should be a lot easier than trying to integrate something that's not. So I'll also send you the Simple SAML PHP documentation. And I might actually send this out through both our Slack channels and our other communication channels, so everyone's got a copy of this stuff, so that they can take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Any other types of software that are being considered? Because we've got exactly the same issue in Australia, and we're thinking about building some how-tos to make it easier for guys or people to integrate various software stacks into the federation. The other option is to look at OpenID Connect as a way to connect your software. There are plenty of OpenID Connect APIs available, which are relatively easy to integrate into code. And the IDPs, the shibboleth IDPs that you'd probably be running can run both SAML and OpenID Connect. So it could be an IDP for an OpenID Connect service. A number of folk have done that. Okay, thanks for the question.
The main problem they were facing probably the released attributes. They couldn't map those or get those attributes. They have tried some of them tried actually, but they have failed to get those attributes as the document suggests. Probably it needs some time to dig down. It's just a recent update that I got from them. Maybe I'll update you in maybe, probably.
Yep. Happy to take it online in Slack if you want to sort of chat about it in the Slack channel. I'm
Yes,
happy
yes,
to assist you there.
that's better.
Usually looking in the log files, so the IDP logs, the process logs that I talked about today, I think, will give you an indication of if the attributes are being generated by the IDP and if they're being filtered out before they get to the service provider. So that may be the case, that they're being generated but then filtered out because the service provider is not configured correctly in your federation registry thing, or it's not been integrated with your IDP correctly. That's usually why attributes go missing. And that's one of the reasons that to have a tool like the attribute validator or an attribute reflector that can show what attributes have been provided as a common service, as a tool for helping to debug these type of issues is really useful.
Thank you.
And actually, we do have a very, very simple version of the attribute or attribute validator that I can provide you. It's just a simple PHP thing. It's not as smart as the one that I showed this morning, but it will give you at least some sort of indication that the attributes are actually flowing or not flowing to a service and what values you're getting. So simple attribute resolver. Okay, I'm just going to check who's that. Okay, good questions. Any other questions or discussions you'd like to have? There was one thing that came up this morning about GDPR and when you start logging and the issues around personal information being stored and users not being able to, not being informed or given consent for that information to be stored can be an issue if you have EU users using your services. And the simple answer to that is to anonymize the user's name. So it's actually not personalized information anymore. It's anonymized information. And that will reduce the risk of getting a call from somebody in Europe saying, please deal, or why have you taken my data and not told me that you're doing so? The FTIC service that Edugain run have actually completely ignored the whole identity of the person as well. So they're just avoiding that issue by not actually having the user's name anywhere in the data sets that are being used to produce the usage logs. But yet GDPR is a thing, and it's has an impact on your federation, even though your federation is many miles away from Europe. It affects our federation as well in Australia, not to a big extent, but we are aware of it and need to make allowances for it. And I think our Australian government is changing our privacy rules or laws to more align with the European laws. So we're going to be moving more down that track of GDPR-ness, where consent for attributes from the actual user is the requirement. So yeah, that's some future pain for us, but it's going to be future pain for everybody, I think, as that starts to roll out. I think even America's starting to do similar type stuff. But you at lunch you were talking about what you're doing at in Sri Lanka with
Actually, we were interested in getting more about access uneven arrangement.
Yep.
We are not in the system that is new to us. So we would like to go from the beginning, what is identity management and how we create account and how we get the institution to be similar scientific to access their information in our researchers traveling to that country.
Yep.
How do we implemented, how we can work together, and the researchers come to that how we can access to our networks.
Yep. So I think there's two things there. There's a thing called EduRoam, which is actually available at this conference this week, and that's a wireless federation. So when a researcher comes from overseas, and they land in your airport or go to a university, they'll be presented with a wireless SID called EduRoam, and the university will provide them a login that actually works with EduRoam SID. So when they come in, they can actually log into your wireless network. Your researchers, when they go overseas, can do exactly the same as long as the institution has EduRoam installed and enabled. It's very global. Most countries are doing it. Most countries have rolled it out to all the universities, but they're also rolling it out to airports, to hospitals, to other areas where researchers might actually turn up. So that's one type of service, and that's a relatively simple one to do. And Learn has actually done that in Sri Lanka already. And I think they're just starting to push it out to other, beyond just universities, to airports. I think somebody was saying that the national airport here in Colombo has EduRoam as an option. The other type of federation is what we've been talking about this week, is the identity federation. And this is where you have a service, you might have some data sets, some compute, some other stuff that you want to make available to your researchers in your universities. You don't want to actually put it in one university, you want to make it available to all universities. So you would put that set of services into the federation, into Learn's federation. And when you do that, there's a bit of technical stuff that needs to happen, and the guys from Learn will be able to help your technical folk get through that. Once you're connected, a user can log into a service in your federation from their university with their university credentials. So I might just demonstrate what that looks like on the screen, if you like.
Let's see, actually.
No, I'll show you now. Yeah. It might take a little bit of getting organized, but we could possibly do it this way, or I can just sit here and share my screen from here. Share, pick one. Oh,
If you connect through HDMI,
yeah, I can't show them the big one, can I? Let's get rid of that. Not working as
connections.
We'll get there shortly. So in Australia, we've actually been working very closely with our government, and we have a thing called NCRIS, which is a national National Research Infrastructure group. It includes a team that looks after high performance computing, one that looks after data, and a whole lot of science specific things like genomics and astronomy and HAS, which is what's that stand for? That's more your social sciences stuff. So there's a whole raft of different scientific groups that are all funded from the Australian government, and the Australian Access Federation have been working to get into that group to be a facility that supports that group. And we work very closely with those teams to make sure that they have their identity federation happening. So that might be some way that you might start to work closer with Learn to make sure that you get priority in getting your services part of your federation. Sorry?
Student services is not available to our Learn.
Your services? I've no idea what services that Learn have configured, but you'll need to have that conversation with Learn to see how what services to add or how to get services that you run into the federation so that your researchers can use them and share them. The other opportunity is to have those services be made available internationally to people in Australia, people in Japan, people in Hong Kong, America, and so forth. And there is a thing called EduGain, which is the Federation of Federations. And there are about 80 nations involved in EduGain already. So you can have your researchers collaborate with other researchers internationally.
The federation means that for each country need to have one federation for their institution.
So each institution has its own identity provider. So that's where the users log in. All of those universities gather together to join their national identity federation. And for you guys, that's Learn. For us, it's the Australian Federation, Access Federation. For America, it's In Common. But all of those federations have grouped together to a thing called EduGain. So yeah, so all of those federations work together to share services across global boundaries. Yeah. So we seem to be
this on the web.
Okay, thank you. One of the tools that start with Nectar. So Nectar is a tool that provides compute services to researchers. I'm not sure exactly what software it's running, but it's federated, and they provide a dashboard that allows me to log in. This service is actually shared between Australia and New Zealand. So New Zealand's federation is called Tirakiri, and we've got the AF. So there's a button that a user can use to log in to that to their home institution. So we'll click on the AF login button. The first thing it asks me to do is say which university or which research organisation I'm from. So this is a list of all the Australian members that where researchers reside. So my identity is actually held within the virtual home. I click on that. This now sends me back to my home institution or a university or wherever, and it asks me to log in. So I log in, my username and password, and then it sends some information about me back to the service provider, so I can actually access that service. We'll see that shortly. Let's get rid of that thing. So here we can see that I've successfully logged in, and the system has passed my given name, so it knows who I am, so it can be nice and friendly to me. It's got my email address up here in the corner, hiding behind that little box, which you can't see at the moment, but there is. It's got my email address, so I can click on that, and it's still hidden behind the thing, so I don't really do much about that. But the service itself allows me to run EC2 instances. It allows me to run a Kubernetes cloud. It allows me to connect or set up a database, all supported and managed by this crowd called the ARDC, Australian Research Data Commons. And in here, I've got a couple of projects, and I've got some compute stuff. So I've been entitled to use up to 20 instances of compute at no cost to me as a researcher. The government or somebody else is funding this stuff, which is great for me because I don't have to worry about getting money to pay for this stuff. It's a lot cheaper for me to do this than doing it on Amazon or Azure or wherever. So that's one example. I can now try and look.
Data. Will you provide sometime like to compile the program to get access CPU power and the memory and all kind of virtual facility for the available networks? Sometimes when you compile a large program, it consumes a huge CPU power and the memory, CPU processing power and the memory. So once the researcher doesn't available that facility in his institution or his computer,
yep,
can we get that facility through that network in available network or institution overseas?
So for us in Australia, the Australian Research Data Commons, which is funded by the government, provides money to buy all that infrastructure and compute. And this dashboard allows me to access that compute based on what sort of research I'm doing. If I'm doing some high-end research which requires a lot of compute, I make a, what do I call it down here? I can make an allocation or request an allocation. And I can set in a new request. And they just want a whole bunch of details about what my project is, what university I'm working for, who I'm funded by, all of that sort of stuff. So some information about the project, and then some information about the cloud resources that I want to consume. So at the moment, this is just 20 virtual processors that I'm consuming. If I had something big, I'd probably want 100 or 200 or 1,000. If I go that big, then they'll probably want some additional funding from my project to help pay for that. I can request huge RAM flavors. So there's options there that I can request a machine which has got lots of memory. I think in here you can also request for GPUs as well. So they offer a GPU option. They offer databases. They offer Kubernetes clouds as well. This will then go through a review process. So I've asked for this stuff. They determine through whatever process they have if I'm entitled to use it. And they might actually charge my project some funding, but not 100%, but it'll also go 50-50 or whatever. I've been lucky I don't have to get charged anything for my smallish amount of resource. Once that decision's been made, then they'll say, okay, away you go. We've set you up. We've given you this limits. You can then go and create whatever service or whatever CPUs or virtual machines or whatever you need to actually do that. Let's just leave that page because we actually won't go through that request. So it's really an allocation system, and they do have limited resources. It's not endless, but this provides a way to share out those resources reasonably fairly across the research projects in Australia. So if I go into projects, I go into compute, go into instances. So you can see here I've just got a number of instances that are fairly small size. I can try and launch a new instance, just go through that process. Okay, I can try that.
The solution on that.
Yep. Cancel that. That better?
Yeah.
So we're going to launch an instance. Yep.
For example, instance name Jagger is the program name.
That's just a name I came up with.
Whatever we can.
Yeah, it's whatever so Jagger is actually the tool that I'm deploying. So I just called that instance Jagger. But it'll give me an idea. So I can call this APAN 56. I can give it a description. So APAN demo. Availability zone. So this is not just running in one place, it's running across a number of institutions. So if we drop that down, we can see it's running at Monash University, Melbourne University's got a part of it. Auckland can provide me compute. So the compute's spread out around the country. So we'll just go Monash, for example. I want one of these, but I could get 10 copies of the same thing over and over. So if I wanted to build a cloud of things fairly quickly, I could go, give me 10 of these, or 10 or 20 or whatever. Let's go next. That's the basic information. It's asking me what sort of image. So I can start from a pre-built image. So I can run up a CentOS server if I wanted to, or a Debian server, or whatever server I wanted. Or I could get a snapshot of somebody else who's actually pre-configured a server. So there's a community of people that use this service that build instances or images for me. So I don't have to do that hard work. I can just say, I want an image with this software, with this a database system, that sort of stuff on it. You can upload your own, I think, as well. You've got to go through a different process to upload that as well. You'd have to build all this yourself, but yeah, I'm not sure what tool sits behind this, but it's an open source tool that is in use here. So I'm going for an image, and it lets me pick one. So these are some of the test images that myself and my colleague Dahlia have set up. So we'll just do that one. PHPH is a tool from another federation that they've made available to us. So I've done that. Next. A bit tricky with this. There we go. Next. Now here's where I can set what size machine I want. So I've got small, which is one virtual CPU and 1 gig of RAM. Or I can go right down the bottom 128 gig of RAM, 32 CPUs. If I had that level of allocation, the little marker says I can't do that because I only have 20. I don't have 128 or 32, so I can't do that. So I could just grab one of these small ones. Need to get next on that. And nothing there. They have some different networking options, but they only provide me with the generic networking option, so I'll just get a generic IPv4 address for this server. But there are other ways that you can set it up so that you can have your own little network, local network wrapped around it, if you want to have a bit more security. Just some other information that's wanting to know about the server. Oh, actually, this is the firewall rules that it's asking for next. Then next, that one. I can run a customized script when the thing starts up if I so chose. I generally don't do that. And then it asked me, this is just metadata. This is something that I can add to my service just so that when somebody else is looking at it, I can say, well, this is a web service, or it's some sort of runtime environment, or some sort of database, or I can add whatever other metadata I like. And we don't do that. And for some reason, it's not, I've missed a step somewhere there, but eventually I get to go and launch, and then I can SSH into that server and do what I like.
So sometimes some big.
Yep. So that will depend on the allocation, your initial allocation when you set it up, when you request the for compute resources. So if you only want it for a month, you say, oh, my allocation, I only want a month's worth of compute. If I want to do this for 5 years, then every year you'll get a notification saying, do you want to extend this? Are you still going on this project? So every year I get a notification from them saying, are you still actively using this stuff? To which I usually say yes. My wife also has an allocation in here for her work. She's got a smaller allocation because she's only doing some fairly lightweight data analytics on pollen counting in Brisbane. And every year she forgets to go and renew her allocation. So it's always a panic that she has to ring up the support desk to say, oh, I forgot again. And they get it renewed for her.
Cheaper than the commercial space.
This is significantly cheaper because it's funded by the Australian government. So the government pays for all the infrastructure and they pay to keep it maintained and updated. But projects, larger projects, will have to contribute some funding to it. And that funding is significantly cheaper than the AWS funding or commercial offerings. But this is something you would have to work out if you're willing to fund somebody to build and run this infrastructure, because it doesn't run by itself. There's a team of a bunch of people sitting behind it to make sure it continues to go. And it's a collaborative effort across a number of universities. So when you saw me say which node I want to set this stuff up, there's people at the University of Melbourne who run their node, and they are paid to run that node by the project. There's people at Monash University that are similarly funded to keep their node going. So the government has a budget, a 5 years budget for this stuff. We're just at the start of we've actually just gone through the start of the first of a new round of budgeting. And it's a truckload of money that they pour into this stuff. but they pour it in so that researchers aren't using commercial providers and paying exorbitant prices for it. So it just helps keep the price down by having the government fund it all. So this is just one of many services that we provide in our federation.
If you want to initiate a system collaboration with one of these, what are the first steps for our country to initiate?
So this service has been running in Australia for nearly 10 or 12 years, pretty much since the Federation started. It was set up as a government project. So there was funding set aside to get the right people to come up with the architecture and deploy the infrastructure, and to work through all the policy stuff about how they're actually going to make it a sustainable service. So the first step I would say would be to set up a project team or set up a project to build out this sort of infrastructure to make it accessible to your researchers. That project team will then work its way through, probably run a few pilots with a number of small research groups, make sure it's all working, and then make it available to people across your federation. When this was first built, federation identity was very key to making it successful, because they didn't want to have another team just managing identities for this service. So that's where we came in, and we provided that identity federation to sit on top of all this stuff. So when I logged in with my home organization credentials, not a credential provided by the service. And that's where the identity management stuff fits in. If I were to leave the AAF tomorrow or whatever reason, my access would be cut off. So I would no longer have access to that infrastructure, because I'm not entitled to it anymore. So the Federation deals with that part of the puzzle as well. One of the other services that is provided in our Federation is a thing called Cloud Store. Now, this failed yesterday when I tried to log in, so hopefully they've got it fixed. It's not the right one. Oh. So Cloud Store is a tool that's been provided by our national NREN, ARNet. It's been a great tool and it's been really popular, but ARNet have decided to turn it off at the end of the year because it's become too expensive for them to operate, which is not really a good thing, because a lot of people now are struggling to find an alternative for storing of their data and to share their data sets, because this tool really worked well for sharing data sets across organizational boundaries. I'll see if I can log in to show you what it looks like. Try that one. Sorry? Oh yeah, plenty to learn. Why is it not letting me log into Cloud Store? Oh, there is Cloud Store. They've changed it again. So as you can see, Cloud Stores, it said being decommissioned 15th of December. I want AF. So I've clicked on AF to log in. It's asked me for some information about myself, but it didn't ask me for my username and password again. So single sign-on worked. Yep. Yep. So I'm going to approve that.
identity management.
It's split up. So it's split into two parts. There's the service provider part, and that sits with the services. Each service will have its own particular method of connecting to the federation, and they will vary a lot for service providers because they run different technologies, different software stacks. There was a question earlier today about how to add service or add the federation to a service, and it really depends on what software is running. The universities run a component called the identity provider because they own all the users' identity, and that sits with the university. The federation itself sort of sits between those two ends, and we provide a mechanism to provide information, technical information to both the identity providers and service providers about the configuration of the federation, and that's called the metadata. So we have tools that allow identity providers and service providers to publish their metadata in this huge metadata file. They slurp that up, and then they can talk to each other.
One quick question. The main the metadata of the accounts.
But not of the accounts, just of the technology. The accounts will stay within the university, within the directories. The accounts are well and truly protected and hidden behind the university's firewalls and within their systems. So when the login occurs, it actually occurs on the premise of the university, so within the university boundaries. What happens then is information about that login is provided to the service provider. So my email address, my first name, my surname, and the fact that it was a successful login are provided to the service provider. My username and password never leave the university. Never, ever, ever, because that's bad. It's always handled by the university. So the university issues me my username and password. They provide a mechanism for me to update it if I lose my password. They provide me a way to do multi-factor using my phone or YubiKeys or whatever. So they are in control of the identity side of things. That's why they have the identity provider within their boundaries. The service provider is just a consumer of the result of that authentication event. So I finally logged into this thing called Cloud Store. I'll make that a bit more readable. Too much readable. There's that. Oh, that's pretty poor. So it's not that clear, but what it's showing you are the files that I actually have stored out on their cloud. I've got this thing called AAF-shibv4-extension. It's a jar file, effectively. So it's a piece of code. And I was sharing that with a colleague at another university. So I added it to Cloud Store. And then there was a mechanism for me, so invite this person to access this file. And then he could come in, he got a notification from Cloud Store. This file is waiting for you to use or to be shared. It's been shared with you. You can come and grab it at any time you like. So it could be one-to-one sharing, or in here, you are able to set up groups of collaborators. So you might have a project of 20 collaborators. You build this group of these collaborators. They all have federated authentication to this service, and you can share files and other stuff, data with that group. So you're not having to share it with 20 people. You say, here, share it with a group, and away you go. members of that group can then share files backwards and forwards. That was a great sort of tool for collaborative sharing. The other thing that's
It doesn't have to have only one network, but different networks with different locations. Is possible.
the files themselves are actually stored by ARNet. So the files are brought to a central place that runs this service. And because ARNet runs our national research network, connectivity between the universities is very high. It's like gigabyte fiber to all the universities through ARNet. So moving files from a university, my university here, to one in Perth, which is the other side of the country, is relatively quick because they run the network. They don't use commercial networks. They actually run their own network to transfer this stuff. And I don't know where they actually store the files. That's within their own data centers somewhere. That's why they're having to terminate the service, because it's just getting too expensive for them to update and refresh that data center. But one of the cool things that I like about this service is this thing called Swan. And this allows me to start up an instance or a compute instance, and it will have access to all of my data. The compute instance itself is a, what do they call it? It's a Jupyter notebook. Yeah, so yeah, start my notebook session. It's got some advanced options. We'll look at them. It lets me determine what release. It's pretty boring. And now I'm starting up a notebook, a Jupyter notebook, which is basically a Linux box in the cloud. And again, this is using Jupyter Lab, and that's all open source software as well. So a lot of the stuff that the identity federations use and the researchers use is open source software, which makes things cheaper because they're not buying commercial software off the shelf. That's gets very expensive very quickly. But my wife uses MATLAB, and that's a commercial product, and she loves it. And she won't use R. She much prefers MATLAB to do her research stuff.
Yeah, actually, we have if the grant is mainly the equipment, mainly the software licenses, like certain more.
Yep.
So in the 60 to 70% of the budget is reserved for the equipment and use licenses.
So that's where Australia has gone a different path and said, we'll provide you that infrastructure. We'll take that out of your budget. We'll put that into this central budget, and then have this shared service that then makes better use of that. Yeah. So instead of having 10 million little instances of servers running around Australia, we just have a big blob of them, and everyone can share that stuff relatively easily. So now I've got my Jupyter notebook. I don't use this stuff much, but it gives me a whole bunch of different options that I can use to run various different tools. As I say, I don't use this one much. You probably can't see that well. Yeah. Yeah. The tricky thing though is you need the right technical people to set it up and maintain it. This is yeah, it's not simple to set up, but once you've got it set up, it's really good for the researchers to use, because they don't have to work out how to set this stuff up themselves. It just becomes a tool of the trade for the researchers that they can easily access and just jump in and use. Notebook, let's try terminal. So I like a terminal. What do we got here? Oops. So if we can just make that a little bit bigger. It's not to let me do that today. So remember when I was using just the file service that I could share files with? Now I can see those files within my Jupyter notebook. So that AAF shib v4.ext file is accessible to this compute. So I, as a researcher, can get some data. I can stick it on Cloud Store. I can fire up my Jupyter notebook. I can do some analysis. I can then export it back out through Cloud Store, and then I can publish it. And I've had a great day. I haven't had to even think about how to set up the infrastructure at all. It's all sitting there ready for me to go to use. Yep. So when I finish with this, I just shut it down, throw it away, it's gone. And I come back tomorrow and I can do this. Yeah. So that's the approach we've taken. A lot of shared services for our researchers across our nation to make it cheaper for researchers in basically to spend money more effectively. Shrinking, yep.
So that you have to find alternative ways to support the research carried on there.
Yeah, I remember 20 years ago, everybody had to have the biggest HPC system in the country. And they'd spend millions and millions of dollars, and it would be stuck in the machine room for that university, only available to that university. And the university down the road had to go and buy their own because there was no sharing of stuff. That thinking is completely gone now. The other one that I would like to show you, actually, I shall shut this one down, I think. I'll work out how to do that later. Way too small to see. Control plus. Oran's another really cool service that we have in Australia, and this one's going to continue on for a while. It has changed how it provides the data. It provided a portal before that you could manipulate data sets on. Now it provides an API, so you can use the APIs to get the data sets, but it's still using the same Australian Access Federation authentication for it. Let's have a look at what is Oran. So this is about urban and regional planning and data sets and tools that you can get access to help you do that urban planning stuff. They have captured and gathered up many different data sets, some commercial, some from universities, some from the public. They've just brought them all together, and they've provided a mechanism for you to request access to those data sets so you can munge them up in whatever way you want. So some of the ones that I've seen, I'm not really very understanding of this service, but you could get a data set about health, so people who present at clinics with a cold or a cough or a flu, and you can map on top of that the economic status. So this might be a poorer suburb, and you see if poorer suburbs have more chance of getting flus and colds and coughs compared to the more affluent suburbs. So you can do that sort of mapping, and it will produce pretty graphs of red stuff here and green stuff there, and it pulls all this data together and presents a really nice way to get that those access to those data sets. Yep.
project to identify projects, super projects in the area to study.
So it's got some data discovery. So it's got lots of data sets. So one of the hardest things to do is find the right data sets that's appropriate for your use. So they've built a whole lot of mechanisms to search for the right data sets. They've got data access. So they have done a lot of work with data owners to determine what the access rules are for those data sets. So some data sets are open to general public to use. Anybody can use them. Some are very restricted down to researchers of this particular project for this period of time. And it's everywhere between. So they've worked out what the data access rules are for each data set that they've gathered. And when you log in, your identity will help identify what level of access you have to each data set. I know that researchers have a lot more access to data sets than, say, our government folk, because governments can actually pay for their own versions of this data sets. But there are a lot of government users that use this Orange service to do their urban planning stuff. It's extremely popular for that. Then they've got the analytic and visualization tools, which is so they can draw great maps and layer things in and graphs all over the place, and way beyond what I can understand they're doing. But when you look at these graphs, they just look really fantastic and really professional. And then they can then use those for whatever research they're doing, or put it in their next 5-year urban plan if they're a government person. And again, it's about gathering stuff together and then making it widely available to a big community, instead of each community member having to go and source their own data set, deal with that data owner saying, can I have access to it? What are my rights and rules around that data access? That's all been done by this particular project.
So limited to particular country, particular urban area, even other countries also can have their own urban planning data set. Is it possible?
This one's at the moment Australian focused. So the guys have done collecting data sets around Australia. Yeah. If you wanted to do a similar thing for Sri Lanka, you'd probably have to have your own team that would work with your own data set providers, because you'd have your own rules and regulations and policies. Australian folk won't understand your policies. You won't understand our policies. So it's probably, if you were going to go down this path, you'd build your own service, but model it on what these guys have done. So let's see if we can find any. That's what resources we got. Sorry? I'm just having a look now. There's this data catalog. So we can. Yeah, so a lot of it's about applying for access to data sets based on who you are. Geoscape data, whatever that is. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about this platform to be able to go any further. But I have seen it in action, and it's really cool when the guys who know how to drive this stuff do drive it well. What else have we got? Yeah. So
may I have a question about the release of in authentication? So does ORIN impose different authentication and assurance according to the data
it does, but it's all built in the system.
Yeah, for example, so and some to access to the restricted data, so user must use high authenticated assurance level.
Not at the moment, but that's why we're doing that in Australia. We're doing the refeds assurance and the refeds multi-factor authentication to enable these guys to start to do that stuff. At the moment, it's good enough. Whatever you've got is good enough. So I'm just trying to find the login button. It's been a while since I've done this. That's very cute, the graphic. Again, it's going back to my pick my authenticator. I could click to remember my organization. This would just disappear as well. Now it's going to ask me for some attributes. No, it's not. It already knows me. So here it knows me as T.Smith at AF. I can try and browse some data sets. Easy to read? No, probably not. So it's now found 5,081 data sets that I can select from. That's going to be hard for me to actually search those unless I have some really good tools to help me search. So Victoria in future 2016. So that's a bit of old stuff. And so me, just as a general user logging into this stuff, have access to that many data sets. There's probably a whole bunch more that are hidden from me because I haven't actually requested access and proven that I actually have a right to access those data sets. What I can do with these data sets, I have no idea, but obviously some people do, and yeah, they've done a really good job with this particular service and how to find data sets.
Is there a window where the researcher can see, because it's a public window and we don't know how much is hidden data. Sometimes the valuable important data from the researcher is not displayed here. How do we can identify whether these up to what level these data are available, or
They do run a support desk, so there are people at the back end of this thing that will probably help you through those sort of questions. So yeah,
sometimes we have a help desk to answer.
Yep, they do have a help desk to answer some of those questions. It's 5 o'clock. That's a opening ceremony went a bit long.
But where is this free charging service?
Sorry?
Free charging service one.
It's free for Australian researchers to access. Yep. So they've done a lot of work with the data set owners to make this stuff as free as possible. As far as I'm aware, there might be some charges involved with some certain data sets, but it's really about opening up data sets and making them available to researchers to do their research. So you would have heard of the FAIR initiative?
Researcher in Australia can access to these databases.
I think so, yeah. I just did. I'm just a nobody, really. Let's see how that goes. Fair research. All the articles for fair research. That's what we're after. I wonder what the acronym actually stands for. Here we go. So in Australia, I'm not sure if this is a global thing or not, but we've now gone to the FAIR principle, so where data sets are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Prior to us going down this path, data sets were, it's my data set and you can't have it. It's hidden. It's not interoperable. It's not reusable. It's not accessible. So we've really pushed hard to get researchers to open up their data sets and go with these principles. And we've put in place in Australia infrastructure to support that. So Oran's part of that infrastructure to make access or to make data sets fair. There are other things, the Research Data Commons has a number of tools. What are they called? There's another piece of the puzzle that I can't recall what it is. But it's about capturing research data sets, marking them or identifying them, and publishing them out so people can find them. There are a whole bunch of people working on that. They use DOIs to attach to those data sets. We've got a thing called RAID, which is the Research Activity ID, which wraps around all of this stuff. We've got ORCIDs, which are unique identifiers for researchers. Have ORCID talked to you guys? ORCID's a global initiative. Yep. Yeah. The Australian Access Federation is the consortium lead for ORCID in Australia. So we manage all the payments and support for ORCID. Yeah. So if you want to know more about ORCID, I'm happy to introduce you to the ORCID team. They'd be happy to visit, because I think they're doing some really good deals, because actually this one does cost. They're doing some really good deals for countries like yourselves that haven't got the financial ability to do it at full cost. So they
in ID for our authors.
Yep.
Otherwise, we have a general knowledge and for every article we get the ID.
Yep. And we're in Australia, we've got 2 funding bodies, and to request funding, you now need as a researcher to provide your ORCID ID. And there's a whole bunch of work going on. So you get some funding, it's tied to your ORCID ID. That funding then is generating some data sets, is generating some output, and all this stuff is tied together by the users or the researchers' ORCID and other persistent identifiers. So persistent identifiers in Australia are a very big topic at the moment. There's a lot of work happening to tie everything together and to make sure it's the right person is associated with that data, that research, and that outcome, and the funding that goes along with it. So that's why ORCIDs are now required as part of the grant process. So lots of stuff for you guys to think about. But are we at the end of the day yet? I think we are. That's right. Been a big day. Let's see who brings. But thanks, guys, for participating and your questions. It's really hard sometimes to get an active conversation happening in the room, but I think this afternoon we've done really well. And I'll still try and track down the Learn folk to have a more deeper conversation with you guys, because I think you guys should join up with them. Actually, on the way over on the flight, I was sitting next to this lady. I had no idea who she was, and she slept soundly. And about halfway through the flight, the hostess came and offered us some water. and she accidentally spilled half a cup of water on me. It's not her fault. That started us chatting, and I found out that she is a researcher at the University of Western Sydney, and also a researcher in Sri Lanka. And she's doing a whole lot of stuff around environmental issues in Sri Lanka, the water systems and silting up and problems with something. She went into a lot of detail that is straight over my head. I'm going to try and catch up with her when I'm back in Australia and she's back at Western Sydney University. But I think she's at the level you guys are at, but has still no idea about what Learn are doing and about identity federations and how these things can help. So I can't remember what her name is. She's going to send me an email. So once I get that, I might get her in contact with you.
You can say all the decisions to do with education, because they do their own support the university system.
Yep. Yep. So it's the university's username and password they're using to access stuff. And that's where the benefits come, because the university is maintaining, securing, and providing that as a service. Service providers don't need to worry about usernames and passwords anymore. It makes life a whole lot easier for those guys as well. Hope you guys have learned something. Great. Thank you. Online guys, thanks for participating, and I'll get some details about those questions to you in the next couple of days or weeks. And thanks for coming, and we'll possibly see you tomorrow. Some more identity management fun.